I have a dream today. When we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Afro Samurai is a revenge-themed hip-hop inspired throwback to the violence and gore we loved from the 90s Ninja Scroll era of anime. It's a fast-paced, action-packed storyline where the substance of the show doesn't come through the regular means of the plot or character interaction, but the incredibly individualistic and mesmerizing style that's brought to life through the animation. It is utterly unique in how it came to be, who it's based on, and its place in history, being one of the first and only anime to have a black protagonist. And in light of everything that's been going on in the world right now, I feel like it's the perfect time to go back to the 2000s and take a look at a historical show that feels more relevant today than ever before. This is Afro Samurai. Let's get into it. Afro Samurai was originally a seinen manga series that was regularly published in the self-funded No How Doujinshi magazine, taking 4 years to be fully released despite only having 10 chapters. But this isn't the story of some crazy success of a self-published manga going viral through fan engagement. In fact, the main reason Afro Samurai went further than a self-published magazine is due to the mangaka Takashi Okazaki having a friend who decided to create an extremely limited run of action figures based on the characters. One of those original figures landed in the lap of the producer of Studio Gonzo, who was inspired to create an animated series just based on the character design. I get it. Between Just Afro and Ninja Ninja, you can tell this show has something special to offer. It's a realistic take on black figures inspired by Okazaki's love and admiration of hip-hop and soul music, and specifically the old American TV classic, Soul Train. After Gonzo's initial interest, the anime itself took 3 years to develop, but during that time, Gonzo created a trailer for the show which grabbed the interest of one civil rights activist turned Jedi Master, Samuel L. Jackson, a man who was an usher at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral and mover in the Black Power scene. So a creative collaboration was born between Jackson, Okazaki, and Gonzo, with the score eventually being produced by the legendary leader of the Wu-Tang Clan, the RZA. This is where Afro Samurai stands entirely alone, a Japanese creator collaborating with a Japanese animation studio but voiced in English by the highest box office grossing actor, let alone black actor in the world, accompanied by a score from one of the most influential black American musical artists in recent history. Suddenly, this little self-produced manga was being backed by major names in entertainment, and that is not a coincidence. Afro Samurai is still one of the only anime to host a lead role by a black character, and that was obviously a big deal to the likes of the RZA and Samuel L. Jackson, and it should be. Up until this point, where we began to see characters like the Raikage and Killer Bee and eventually Canary from Hunter x Hunter who accurately depict realistic-looking black people, anime had either been insulting to or simply vacant of black characters. However, black and Asian culture had been cross-pollinating since the old Wu-Tang films of the late 60s found their way into cheap cinemas in the Bronx and Harlem. For an America still finding its way after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., seeing any person of color take a powerful role on the big screen was an inspirational thing. By the time we received Dragon Ball Z regularly in America, anime already had a foothold in the black community. For anime enthusiasts like Jackson and the RZA, finding a creator like Okazaki who was inspired by African American art like hip-hop and soul music, a Japanese man who used that inspiration to highlight that medium and its creators in his work, instead of just making black characters the rare once-off, gave representation to a black audience in a traditional Japanese-dominated but very Caucasian-looking art form. For more on that, check out our video on Dragon Ball Z's Forgotten History, but for now, let's talk about the show and Afro himself. Afro Samurai has a straightforward plot. There's two headbands, number 1 and number 2. The owner of number 1 is treated like a god, the best swordsman in the world, while the owner of number 2 can challenge number 1 for his position as the best, but anyone can challenge number 2 for the headband. This creates a relatively peaceful and godlike life for the owner of number 1, but a life filled with killing and constant attacks for number 2. The series begins with Afro as a kid following his father, the owner of the number 1 headband. He gets challenged by a man who I can only assume is an American old Western style cowboy named Justice, who fights and on a final unexpected killing stroke beheads Afro's father, taking the number 1 headband for himself. And so Afro grows up with a heart filled with hate and driven by thoughts of revenge, of finding the number 2 headband, challenging Justice, and killing him as revenge for his father's untimely death. The story progresses, flashing back and forth between time periods, showing Afro growing up and learning his sword techniques in his past before returning to the present day as he dispatches men by the dozen with a cold and almost soulless demeanor. It's a show that thrives on the design work and animation. The story is merely a device to bring Afro from one fight to another so Okazaki's designs can have more time in the action. But for what I want to talk about today, the story is still vitally important. The plot continues with Afro being thrown into danger over and over as multiple groups attempt to snatch away the number 2 headband. Despite it making him the, quote, second best swordsman in all the world, all types of challengers fight Afro. Anything from a crossbow man to an RPG man to a fucking Terminator. His only friend and companion Ninja Ninja is like his hype man, providing commentary on most of Afro's fights. Ninja Ninja likely represents Afro's true personality, the part of him that got buried and destroyed through the destruction of everyone in his wake. As a constant cold killer, he needed to burn the part of him with emotion, with doubt, love, wants, desires, dreams, silliness, everything that doesn't have to do with his blade. And as Afro progresses closer to his goal, we see him lose more and more of the things that are important to him: his friends, his peers, his master's dojo, along with the sword master who taught him, the girl who possibly was the only love interest in Afro's entire life, and eventually his companion, who's really no more than an imaginary friend. Ninja Ninja's death at the hand of Jinno, one of Afro's old friends and peers, is important. It symbolizes the death of Afro the person, leaving only Afro the samurai. And it's only after Ninja Ninja dies that Afro begins truly fighting Jinno, showing that the last shred of humanity, the only thing that kept him from being able to kill a friend, is gone. It creates a visceral reaction watching someone slowly lose their humanity and everything important in their life for the sake of one goal, knowing that goal won't bring the peace and life they seek. And at the end of the journey, we see the same cycle repeating in Jinno. The story locks onto that idea that hatred only breeds more hatred, but here's what hit me the hardest. After all the pain, after all the suffering Afro goes through to take revenge for his father's death, he finally succeeds and obtains the number 1 headband, only to get challenged by his childhood friend Jinno yet again. As the final scene comes to a close, with Jinno and Afro about to face off, the screen fades to black as Afro and Ninja Ninja's voices say in unison. And so, the never-ending battle continues.
On and on and on and on.
Alright, cut the music. I don't think it's a coincidence that the man who killed Afro's father to take the number 1 headband was a white man named Justice. I also don't think it's a coincidence that number 1 gets to sit and be God while number 2 has to fight every day just to survive. This never-ending battle doesn't just apply to a fictional story about a badass samurai out for revenge. It applies to us. It applies to our black brothers and sisters of America now. Today. People of color have been in a constant, never-ending battle in our country since its foundation. A battle for freedom, for equality, and for their lives. This hierarchy and symbolism in Afro Samurai is huge, and losing oneself is what happens when you battle perceived justice alone. Now look, I've been trying to talk about the history, to talk about the suffering that people of African descent have gone through for hundreds of years all over the world, from South America all the way to Asia. But first of all, there's so much, and coming from me, it just kind of sounds rhetorical. I know the history, you should know the history, and the people that history impacts the most know that history. But did you know that little boys and girls are sent home from school for having afros, or wearing dreads, or having braids, or that inner cities are set up like jails, like traps that you can't get out of, bad public transportation, defunded schools, grocery stores with rotten food, no jobs, and government-funded programs that keep you fed but so poor that you can't leave. Do you realize that white colonial descendants have had 370 years to get a head start on our black brothers and sisters of America. That is 370 years to set up our lives, our families, our contacts, our influence, and our money. And that because of that, white people and white will has bought justice. It has become justice in America. The billionaires and the politicians that they help fund are predominantly white and majority self-interested. Their last line of defense, the police, are the dogs that they hold on chains to enforce the laws that they create. Not the people for the people by the people, but the rich sociopaths who have benefited the most from that 370-year head start. For the subjugation of a people that they tricked, kidnapped, enslaved, and abused for their own benefit and their own profit. Now we, Bonsai Pop, would be nothing without our black community. Since we started, Tyler and I have been so excited about the diverse group of people that these videos have brought together. Above that, anime would be nothing without its black audience. And I would argue that there's no community more diehard in the scene. And above that, America would be nothing without its black lives. George Floyd was a human being, and his life mattered. Breonna Taylor was a human being, and her life mattered. Ahmaud Arbery, Terrence Kirchner, Keith Lamont Scott, Corin Gaines, Michael Brown. These were all human beings with futures ahead of them and people who loved them. Their lives matter. Aiyana Jones was 7 years old when she was shot in the head and killed by a police officer during a raid on Detroit's east side. The cop walked. I keep seeing these posts about all lives matter on social media. But if that's true, then why are all of these people that I just mentioned dead at the hands of the police? The people that are paid by our government to protect and serve the people of this country, to protect and serve justice and peace. Doesn't sound like justice and peace to me. Because I'm human, because I can identify with a man simply standing by his bike, or a woman protecting her son, or a little kid who had no control over the situation she was in. However, what I can't identify with is getting murdered for any of that, especially not by a cop. Because see, when a cop kills you, your government is killing you. The government gave them that gun and that badge and the feeling that they're so powerful that they can get away with anything because they have lunch with the DA. And if that isn't bad enough, our government represents us to the rest of the world. So until we, the people, make change, we are partially responsible for every black death at the hand of our government. Until we make a change, all cops are bad cops because they work for a government that allows murder and denies civil rights. I'm no SJW. What I am is an American citizen who's embarrassed by his country. And right now, the world is on fire. But I say, let's not put it out until we see some of that chivistic cleansing, until we see real justice. It's gonna take education. It's gonna take getting our asses to the voting booth every single time that there is an election. But this idea of America, the America that we were promised as children, will never be a reality until people of all nationalities, genders, sexuality, and color are equal within our United States. The never-ending battle for the #1 headband is a battle for supremacy. It is the dissolvement of supremacy that brings about peace. And right now, I only see one side fighting for supremacy. The rest of us are fighting for equality, for black lives and the lives of others. So don't stop. My name is Michael Pixley. This is Bonsai Pop. We are anti-fascist. Black Lives Matter.